Let's bring in Josh Kraushaar and Siobhan Hughes. Josh writes the Against the Grain column and is a podcast host for the National Journal. And Siobhan is a congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to you both. Siobhan, Senate Democrats are walking into what seems to be a brick wall on voting rights. What's the best case scenario that Democrats are hoping for?
The best case scenario is that they make a point to the public, that they show the activist base and also the donor base that they've tried. There is a backup plan. It's not the Democrats' backup plan, and it's certainly not their first choice, but something that would center on reforms to the Electoral Count Act to clear up the ambiguity that resulted in the January 6th attack.
Well, Josh, the president has been sounding alarms about election subversion and raising fears of people's votes not being counted. So is this something which there's proof of? What is he basing this on?
You know, he's trying to raise the anger and the attention of his base. But, you know, there are a lot of rule changes that have been taking place in many of these Republican-led states. Some of the changes have simply been to change the pandemic rules of voting to the pre-pandemic rules. Number of early voting days, you know, drop boxes in the specific locations. But certainly any issue related to, you know, preventing voters' access to the polls can certainly rally the Democratic Party base. It's become a major issue for the Democratic Party and for the White House. You know, I think the president got a little bit ahead of himself. There was quite a bit of demagoguery in the speech he gave last week in Atlanta, and you know, politically, it's put him in a very tough position because it's not just the Republicans that are opposing his voting measures, but it's these two Republicans, and Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin. So yeah, there is great concern over the issue of voting access. It's an issue that, especially in the African American community, it's a prerequisite for Biden to address. But by raising the expectations so high and not being able to deliver on his promises, it's created a double whammy where his base is now somewhat disillusioned, and the middle of the road voters want the president to pay attention to some of the other more pressing issues that Washington is facing.
Right, those two senators' names, Democratic senators Manchin and Sinema, very familiar whenever we talk about those challenges to President Biden's agenda. Siobhan, your newspaper, The Wall Street Journal, reports the White House is looking to restart talks with Senator Manchin on the president's social and climate spending bill. What can you tell us about what that may look like?
Well, the interesting thing about that interview by my Wall Street Journal colleagues is that we're not going to know what it's going to look like. And that's because the president and his aides believe part of their miscalculation was in publicizing those meetings with Joe Manchin. And they feel that that very publicity may have created conditions that were not conducive to a result. There is talk on Capitol Hill about trying to advance some sort of narrow package focused on climate change, universal pre-kindergarten, some Affordable Care Act subsidies. And so that's the kind of thing that would be welcomed by Democrats with open arms. I thought it was interesting also in the Biden presser just now, where reporters were asking him questions. He got a question about inflation, and he had almost a throwaway line about how, well, maybe there are some things we can do, and certainly subsidizing the ACA payments and universal pre-kindergarten would help lower the costs that most Americans are paying.
Right, because we know that Senator Manchin in particular has expressed those concerns about the cost to Americans and inflation. So, Josh, Senators Sanders, Warren, and Majority Leader Schumer have expressed either openness to or haven't said whether they would support primary challengers to Senators Manchin and Sinema. Right now, do Senators Manchin and Sinema face a graver threat from Republicans or within their own party?
Well, it depends on the senator. Senator Sinema is going to face a challenge in 2024. She's not up for another 2 years. Same with Senator Manchin. But this is progressives and progressive groups blowing off steam. But we're not. Both of those Democratic senators don't really feel the immediate pressure because they're not in their election year. They're not up for re-election for another 2 years. In West Virginia, Senator Manchin has a unique electorate that's not just very Trumpy, very Republican, but even the Democrats in West Virginia tend to be much more conservative than your average Democratic voter, and even Democratic voters in West Virginia are offering some skepticism of the Build Back Better legislation. They probably are more likely to agree with Joe Manchin on the issue than Joe Biden. In Arizona, it's a little bit of a different scenario. Senator Sinema has improved her prospects for a general election. She's won support with Republicans and independents in the polling I've seen, but she's lost support with her own party. The big question is going to be, and this is looking quite a few years down the road, whether someone like Congressman Ruben Gallego or any other ambitious, more progressive Democrat will seek to challenge her in a primary. She may very well be quite vulnerable, but also that could also jeopardize the Democratic's hold on a swing state seat in Arizona.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on that dynamic that you just outlined. We'll see how that shakes out. Siobhan, recent CBS News polling showed 61% of Americans supporting the president's big legislative priorities. Are the Democrats' big ticket items, which enjoy public support, more likely to fall victim to Republican opposition or Democratic infighting?
Well, at this point, the primary hurdle has been the Democratic infighting. So it's been hard to even get to the point of Republican opposition because Democrats haven't been able to settle on something that they can show to the American people. And at the top of that list, I would say the extension of the expanded child care credit, which was something that Democrats had planned to run on in the 2022 midterm elections, and which they can now not agree on, due in large part to opposition from Joe Manchin. So their primary hurdle is clearly within their own party. And beyond that, well, we'll see.
Well, Josh, the White House has indicated that the president's press conference today would be a reset of sorts. What does that mean exactly, Josh? What specific groups are officials hoping to target and connect with this reset?
Yeah, the point of the press conference was both to tout the president's achievements, the fact that child poverty has gone down, that the economy perhaps is better than it was at the worst of the pandemic. You heard the president talk about those themes at the outset. And I think the theme politically that the president was driving home is that Democrats at least are trying to do something, and the Republicans are the party of no and nothing. You heard that on several occasions from President Biden. He even quoted the current governor, the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, who was given an interview with the Washington Examiner, where he basically said he decided not to run for the Senate because he didn't know what his own party stood for in Washington. So expect to hear that a lot more from this White House. It's not going to be this is an election, a midterm election coming up that they want to be a choice between the two parties, not just a referendum on the president's standing right now in the state of the economy.
Midterms will be here before we know it. Josh Kraushaar and Siobhan Hughes, great to see you both. Thank you.